Go ahead, Councillor Bilsma.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think we're all aware our inboxes were certainly quite active this morning, and about a dialogue that's been taking place between our own medical doctor of public health and Dr. Moore from the province. So as I understand it, our own Dr. Hirji wrote a letter to parents and guardians. We've received that letter. I don't need to read it. I think that it was fine for Dr. Hirji to write that letter insofar as he has a responsibility and obligation and a task to perform. Then Dr. Moore responded with an explanation, or at least his perspective on that, and giving justifications for having a difference of opinion, and I think asking Dr. Hirji to reconsider, to fall in line. I don't know. That's not my call at this point. It's just kind of going through the timing for the purposes of a discussion. I think what was probably more challenging to me, that and there's some very valid points that need to be made there. I think perhaps others can make them, but I think what's very challenging is all of a sudden this became very political. It was very Andrea Horvath, leader of the NDP, weighed in, as did the local NDP MPPs, which they have every right to do. What was a little bit disturbing was Mr. Dave Augustine weighed in as a candidate for the NDP, and I think that points to I know it's spring election and it's right around the corner, and I hope that this whole event, it was challenging at first, a little disturbing to me, that we have our own medical public health doctor in disagreement with the province. But then when the politics started to come out, I really just hope that this had nothing to do with politics, because ultimately at the very root of this is our children and our children in school and their ability to go to school safely, but also in that safety include things like their ability to socialize, as all young elementary and high school students ought to be able to do, and their mental, social health as well. So I'm wondering if we can get an explanation of the events and a justification. I'd like to hear first from Dr. Hirji, if we could.
Yes. Dr. Hirji, would you respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm a little unsure entirely where the question was going. As I understand, mostly the councillor was interested in hearing what was the events that occurred. So of course, last week on Wednesday, the province announced that they were going to move to have schools reopened in person learning this week. I was very pleased to hear that. That's something I've been advocating strongly for quite a while. The province put out what they proposed to be the measures that they thought would be necessary to keep schools safe. We of course reviewed that and decided that there was, opportunity for us to do a little bit more, to give our children, to give our teachers, to give school staff, and the entire school community a higher level of protection. And we think that's really important, because as the council noted, protecting our children, having them having a really enriching school experience is very valuable. And so we worked and consulted very quickly and with a lot of intensity with our school boards and our private schools to come up with some additional measures. We adjusted them based on their feedback and communicated on Friday what we were going to recommend that they move forward with. I shared those same materials then with the Chief Medical Officer of Health for his awareness. There's some follow-up conversation with him around that, where that letter was shared in response to that. We of course took that into account. We had further meetings with our school boards this week to discuss those. And we've made some small adjustments, mostly to address some of the workload upon our school boards, and are moving forward with the measures we think will give our children and our teachers and our school staff really the protection that I think they deserve as they go back to in-person learning.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Hirji. I'm not questioning the dialogue going back and forth so much. And maybe there's really nothing. It became very controversial very, very quick, and I'm trying to wrap my mind about it because, of course, our inboxes were full. I've received a lot of questions from constituents about what's really going on here. Is there a fight going on between our own Dr. Hirji, so to speak, and the Chief Medical Officer of Public Health from Ontario? There needs to be an accord, and ultimately, and this is the point I want to keep driving. It's the kids, and I think that a wholesome view of child health needs to include both the social and the mental health, and I think we're all aware, and I don't need to restate the obvious, that children's health, mental, social health has greatly suffered during the pandemic, and the view to get back to normal is desirable, and I know that the Ontario Science Table did weigh in, and that was also reported in the letter as well. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Unfortunately, it did get political, and that's a part, I guess, that the politicians have to answer for. Using such an opportunity to create score some election points. I think that's unconscionable. Ultimately, we want the children's health at this point to dictate and determine our course. I have no further at this point, Mr. Chair.
CAO, you want to respond to?
Thank you, Chair, through you, and don't want to go beyond my area of expertise, but I have been involved in these discussions, and I think the challenge that many of you are having is, I think it's being very inaccurately represented in the media. Even the questions that were put to Dr. Moore today, I think his responses were accurate. What's lost in all of it, because I've been a part of these discussions in this past week, public health didn't dictate on Friday what was going to happen. They were giving advice, and it was still an ongoing discussion that reconvened earlier this week and continued, as Dr. Hirji said, to be tweaked and modified. We've worked very collaboratively with the 4 boards, and I think we've come to an agreement on how we're going to move forward. So it's been informed by all the different inputs, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Hirji, but I think that we came to a place where we can move forward and protect our kids.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor Bilsma?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Gale.
Mr. Chair, my comments are on a totally different item. Would you like me to stand down until you hear anybody else that wants to talk about that?
Sure. That's a good idea, Bob. We'll do that.
Okay.
All right. Councillor Whalen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the same predicament as Councillor Gale, so I'll wait till
Okay.
my turn.
That sounds fine. Councillor Edgar.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I do want to speak on this issue briefly, and through you to Dr. Hirji. Dr. Hirji, I had a phone call today from a very, very irate constituent, and his biggest concern was that the Chief Medical Officer of Health seemed to be accusing you of going ahead and making decisions within a silo. In other words, you were making these decisions without consultations of any kind other than with us as council and the Board of Education. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that if you so wish.
Thank you,
Dr. Hirji.
Mr. Chair, to the councillor for that question. So, whenever we make any kinds of advice locally or recommendations, or in, the most extreme case, an order or legal instruction, we always consult with our local partners, because they're the really key ones who are going to be impacted, and we want to make sure we understand how this is going to work for them. So before we did anything, we were meeting with our school boards, we were meeting with our private schools, we were meeting with our child care operators, really understanding what their perspectives were, what they thought of our ideas, and really trying to craft what we were doing forward. In terms of the science, we reviewed the work that the science table has put out in terms of school reopening and measures that would keep schools safe. Likewise, there's been copious detail put out by Public Health Ontario, as well as by other scientific bodies, and all of that was part of what we reviewed going forward. And so I thought we had quite fulsome consultation with the relevant local partners and quite fulsome review of the relevant science that mattered here. The Chief Medical Officer of Health has brought up elements, for example, consulting with the Ministry of Laboral Skills and Development. I find that a little bit unusual. I can certainly take that feedback as something we might consider in the future, but nothing we are proposing was really about employee health or specific to workers. So I'm not sure why that was a relevant ministry to have consulted with, for example. So take the feedback that maybe there were other bodies that perhaps we should have consulted with. I note again, the province announced the decision to reopen schools on Wednesday, which did not give us a lot of time. And we really focused, as we always do, on the people locally who really understand the environment here and particularly understand our schools and how infections and COVID has impacted our schools.
Thank you, Doctor. And the one person that, or the one area that he felt should have been consulted was the actual Chief Medical Officer of Health, who, of course, is your boss. And he was just astounded that you would go ahead and do something like this without talking to the boss. And could you comment on that, please?
Dr. Hirji?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, first off, I would say the Chief Medical Officer of Health is quite categorically not my boss. It is very clear in the Health Protection and Promotion Act that a Medical Officer of Health reports to and is accountable to the Board of Health, which is this body. Regional Council is that body. And so Regional Council is my boss and not the Chief Medical Officer of Health. The Chief Medical Officer of Health is the Chief Advisor on Public Health Matters to the provincial government. He's, of course, part of our sector. He's a close colleague that we want to work with at times. Historically, when we take action that affects us locally, we generally have not consulted with the Chief Medical Officer of Health. There's never been an expectation in the province that we would consult with the Chief Medical Officer of Health. The expectation is, of course, we'd keep them informed of what we are doing locally so that they understand, but not that we would necessarily consult. And throughout this pandemic and well before the pandemic, when Section 22 orders may have been issued, legal instructions may have been issued, decisions made locally, it's never been an expectation to consult with the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So that's certainly, I think, a new expectation that he communicated in that letter. Certainly one we'll take under advisement for the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hirji, and I hope that I hope this gets reported on, because there's a lot of people out there that obviously are misunderstanding the relationships involved. Thank you again. That's me, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Edgar. I have promised Councillor Gale and Councillor Whalen they want to deal with a different matter to go to it. So Councillor Furtick, is it on this matter or something else? Councillor Furtick, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Doctor, can you please tell me when are we going to deal with the acting medical officer with Dr. Hirji? Were we not supposed to look at his possible appointment?
I'll go to the CAO on that matter of personnel. CAO.
Thank you, Chair, through you. In fact, in the minutes of the community or Public Health and Community Services Committee, there was a memorandum from myself articulating what to expect in terms of next steps. A full recruitment process will be undertaken. Some of that work has begun, but it's going to start ramping up very soon. But there's a memo within those minutes that describe that.
Thank you, Mr. Trick. I'm glad to hear that, because I fully support everything that Dr. Hirji has done for the residents of Niagara. And I think just like everybody else, we've gotten a whole bunch of nasty emails. Not only nasty emails, I have nasty letters that have threatened me and Dr. Hirji to some degree, that saying that he's not capable of doing this or that or anything else. I understand that people have a right to do these things, but I think it's going too far. I couldn't believe when I'm getting the letters, and it's the provincial policy that dictates what's going on. So I just throw that out to you, Mr. Chair, and I'm certainly prepared to share that with anybody else. But at the same token, I would like to see that Dr. Hirji gets promoted and getting rid of that darn acting medical officer, whatever his title is. And I think it would send a great message to the province that we fully support Dr. Hirji. So whatever can be done, and I thank you, Mr. Tripp, and I hope we can move a little bit faster. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Furtick. Councillor Villela.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to council. I too was extremely disturbed by everything. I was getting emails and calls 11 o'clock last night, big breaking story. My first thought was I'm going to sleep on this. I don't think it's quite possibly maybe not even a legit letter until I verified that it was. I have a couple concerns, and I will wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Bylsma. I felt that this smelled very political to me, extremely political to me, and it got very political very fast. Politics. So I want to make that very clear. I don't want to be a pawn in this type of environment whatsoever. That being said, I had a couple concerns. My concern was maybe there was no opportunity, Dr. Hirji, this is directed to you through you, Mr. Chair, no opportunity to, there was no meeting maybe in between when the letter was received and when you met with public health to maybe just let us know. We've talked about this in the past. I'm not a big fan of being sideswiped, basically. I think that this would be something, if it was going to go on global news, that maybe we should have been made aware of ahead of time. Whether council agrees with me or not on that, whether it's our right to even know anything, I think it's prudent that the public understand that we don't have a lot of rights when it comes to that. If Dr. Hirji, if you want to share something with us, am I to understand, then you can, and if you choose not to, you don't have to. Is that a fair assessment? Because I'm going to stop hoping and praying and wishing that that we don't get sideswiped anymore.
Dr. Hirji.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not entirely sure I understand what the councillor was asking. If I can just clarify what did happen here is that you may remember, I believe it was on Saturday, I shared a lengthy email with councillors to keep them appraised of what I was recommending to schools so that they were fully aware of that. When the Chief Medical Officer of Health wrote his letter, he CC'd the regional chair on that letter. To me, that implied that Regional Council through the regional chair had now been brought into the loop, and I was going to defer to the regional chair if and on what timeline and through which different distribution channel that letter would be further distributed. If it had not gone to the regional chair, of course, I would have considered sending it directly to council. But since it went there, I felt it was already within the council circle and it did not need to come from me.
So might I understand that because it went to the regional chair that you felt that that was advising council? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
How would I know? How would I know about the letter? How would I don't understand, Dr. Hirji, but that's okay. Thank you very much. I'll just move on. I had one more question, but it's kind of left my mind now. Oh, just a point. Throughout this whole unfortunate couple of years, we've had to deal with a great deal of things. And it has been repeated over and over again to trust the science table. Would you not consider the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario an expert in this field? Like, this is where I get a little confused. So because he disagrees with the mode that you're taking, all of a sudden he's not considered somebody that we look to as an expert in the field. And you had mentioned that you normally don't concur or confer with him in any regards in normal circumstances. This isn't a normal circumstance. This is a pandemic, and the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, who are overseeing everything, I think have a validity in what they say. So all of a sudden we override that, and I used the word override previously, and I was lambasted in the press for it, but basically, is that not what we're doing? We're going in a different direction of what's recommended by the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, who is an expert in this field. So I don't even have a question there. That was more of just a statement. I'm just I'm very disappointed, but thank you for that. But I find disrespect the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, that's to me something I don't understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Chair, if I could maybe just briefly give a little bit of explanation, which may help the councillor and perhaps others who might share that same question. Absolutely. The Chief Medical Officer of Health is a public health physician. He's similar to me. He is, of course, an expert here. There's, of course, many different experts out there. And one of the unfortunate challenges we are dealing with in this pandemic is we're, of course, in a transition period right now from a point where we had COVID-19 very well controlled to a point where hopefully COVID-19 will become endemic. And how do we best manage that transition, especially when we are all struggling with resources right now? And where do we draw the right balance between measures that protect health and measures that are going to still be within the capacity of us to deliver? I think also the Chief Medical Officer of Health has a difficult job in that we have a diverse province here in Ontario, and he has to come with recommendations that address the entire province. But of course, we know the province isn't all the same. Timmins, Ontario is very different than Sioux Lookout, which is very different than here in Niagara, which is very different than downtown Toronto. And we have a system in Ontario of local medical officer of health to recognize that there are variations regionally and that not necessarily the same exact process is going to necessarily be the best one everywhere. And so I think the Chief Medical Officer of Health put forward a approach to reopening schools. It was absolutely the right decision to open schools. And I think there's really good measures put in place by the province to help keep schools safe. However, being here locally in Niagara, having worked with our schools and school boards for a couple of years, dealing with COVID-19, observing how COVID-19 is spread in schools, and really understanding what has worked to stop that spread and to prevent outbreaks in our schools, I think I have the local perspective of what is actually going to be important in Niagara. And I saw opportunity to build on the good foundation the province had given us and add some additional measures in Niagara that would keep our children, our teachers, and our staff in schools even safer. And that's what I endeavored to do. So this wasn't in some way overriding the province or conflicting with the province. This was building on the foundation of the province by taking the local knowledge that we have here in Niagara and putting in place measures that I think will better serve the people of Niagara based on our knowledge of Niagara.
Thank you. Councillor Foster is next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess my question that I was going to pose has already been answered by Dr. Hirji. I appreciate that last set of commentary. One thing out of this whole thing, and where I will agree with some of the earlier speakers, boy, this became very political very quick. And I really don't know where the heck it came from. It's pretty obvious that a memo was leaked somewhere that had been going on. The letter that came to Dr. Hirji and the regional chair was one thing. How this became, a readily available public document, is somewhat beyond me, and where that came from. So I just think, I completely support Dr. Hirji and what he has done. He's done exactly what it is that we have said, and that is he's worked with the other groups, he's partnered with them, he's made sure that people are talking, and that's an important part of his role as well. So anyway, no questions, just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Houston, you're next.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. And I appreciate those comments to Dr. Hirji, because my understanding is the province set some minimum standards, and you, in consultation with our local education providers, decided to add a level of extra protection to make our schools safe, correct?
Mr. Chair, that's exactly correct. I wanted to give some additional protections because I saw opportunity here in Niagara where we could do that.
Mm-hmm. So actually, this is very similar to perhaps that Section 22 order where we had different rules or some additional rules for some of our local businesses than perhaps other areas, because you felt that there was data that warranted some extra layers of protection, correct?
Yeah, voluntarily.
Okay, thank you for that. And just a follow up, can you speak to what was it exactly that made you feel like that Niagara specifically needed that extra layer of protection?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't think I can boil it down to just a single thing. Recommendations for school opening, they talked about the importance of having masks from K through 12. And so I thought, for example, there's an opportunity there for us to fill that gap for the province and actually have masks worn in kindergarten. Other parts of Ontario had actually done this prior to Niagara, and they had done it with great success. And I thought, learning from their experience, it made sense for us to add that here, particularly since we have seen infection spreading amongst children in kindergarten. So that was one source of information, looking at some of the best evidence and seeing where there's opportunities to apply it. The other part is, of course, our past experience with what we have seen in terms of spread of COVID-19 in our schools and outbreaks. And what we've really seen is that when we are aggressive up front about addressing spread in a school, we can usually stop that spread right in its tracks and get everybody back in school safely. When unfortunately we don't learn about an infection early, perhaps someone doesn't go and get tested, we then have a much larger number of people infected in the school. Unfortunately, those tend to be where we have outbreaks that continue to spread and take a while to actually get under control and actually cause a lot more disruption in learning. And I think critical to being able to respond quickly is that we need to learn when someone is tested positive so we can act aggressively. And I thought that was one element that wasn't present in the province's approach. I think in Niagara, we have seen that has been something that has been very effective. And so I wanted to try and preserve that as much as possible by building a way for parents to report test results to us in public health, so then we could take that early action to isolate people at risk and really stop that spread in its tracks and keep everybody else in school safely.
Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind me paraphrasing, I think you've taken a made in Niagara approach to our plan to make our schools of the province. Would that be fair summary of what you just said?
Mr. Chair, I think that'd be a very fair summary with just the shift from the word and made in Niagara approach to a made in Niagara enhancement.
Okay, gotten things just seem to run away on social media, and you know, you've been targeted through this whole